If you guys want one-on-one training, online training, or nutritional coaching, please head on over to my website, jpfitnesspro.com. Just go to the services tab and select which one you would like. You can also subscribe to my newsletter and contact me through my website as well. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks. What is up, you guys? JP here. One common saying or term you may have heard before or you're consistently hearing now is that sumo deadlifts are quote-unquote easier than conventional deadlifts. And the main point of this video is that that is not the case by far. There is nothing inherently easier about sumo deadlifts over conventional deadlifts, and that doesn't mean that they might not be easier for you. Now, some people will find that sumo they can pull better weight with, it feels better, it's neater, but that the opposite's also true, that some people feel better just with conventional deadlifts over sumo deadlifts. So again, the main thing is that sumo deadlifts just aren't inherently easier for everyone. There's sometimes it's more of a joke, but sometimes it's more of a saying that people actually say with no joke behind it, is that sumo deadlifts are, people who sumo deadlift are cheating, which just isn't the case. It's not. So people who sumo deadlift, it still requires the same demands, it still requires the same overall difficulty in regards to what a traditional deadlift is. There's just slight differences between a traditional deadlift, but it's just not easier overall. So to start out, the main thing that people say one of the main points that people say that sumo is easier is that you're not going all the way down. And when they say you're not going all the way down, what does that mean? Okay, so they don't have to bend further forward to grab the bar. So because they're decreasing the range of motion, they're inherently making the lift easier. Now let's take this from a conventional standpoint. Let's just look at the conventional deadlift in general. You take a conventional deadlift, I have my feet neutral and I come down and grab the bar. And that's where someone may pull from a regular conventional distance, is that far. That's how far you pull if you're not manipulating the deadlift in any way. Now, if I were to take this bar and I were to put this bar onto blocks, let's just say I had a block on each side, and instead of pulling from that height, I'm pulling from right here. Now, I'm decreasing the range of motion. But what's happening is when I'm taking the first deadlift and the second deadlift, the one where I hypothetically had it on blocks, again, the first one would be from here, and the second one would be from here. You have to understand is that the moment arm is now shrinking when I go from the first example to the second example. My femur or my hips aren't as far from the resistance in relation to the femur. So essentially when I go from here to here, my hips are getting a little bit closer to the bar. So there's not as much torque on my hips when I pull from a higher position. Now in that sense, that's what would technically be, and from what people are trying to say, that would be quote-unquote cheating, is you're actually making the lift easier because there's less torque on the hips. Now, you're doing that by decreasing the distance you have to pick up the bar. But that's not the same with the sumo deadlift. That's what people mean when they say the sumo deadlift, but that's not the case because they're just not understanding how a hip extension works. When you look at a sumo deadlift, you have to think of hip extension demands from a 3D perspective. And I have to give credit to Greg Nuckols. He wrote a really good article on this. You could just look at the article on Stronger by Science. I learned a lot of this stuff from him, but he explains it very well. You have to look at hip extension demands from a 3D perspective. So you can't, when you do a sumo and your legs are wider, and you don't have to bend down as far, it's not the same as decreasing range of motion from one conventional to another conventional. Yes, you're decreasing range of motion when you go down into a sumo, but what you have to understand is that the moment arm in relation to your hips and your femur, the moment arm is not getting shorter at that point. All you're doing is abducting the hips and changing the angle of that moment arm. Your femurs aren't magically getting shorter when you widen your foot stance. So there's still the same torque on your hips essentially between a conventional and a sumo. So again, a conventional, if you look at it, your femurs and then your hips shoot back a certain amount of distance. And then when you have a sumo stance, and you go down, there's still the same amount of distance. Obviously, your femurs aren't going to change. So there's the hip extension demands are virtually identical between the conventional and the sumo. Again, you're just having to look at it from more of a 3D perspective from the conventional and the sumo. And with a sumo, the hip extension is now not just in the sagittal plane. It's in the sagittal and the frontal plane. The sagittal being this way and the frontal plane being this way. So instead of it just being the sagittal plane, it's now, because you have to abduct your femur to when you do a sumo stance deadlift, it's now in the sagittal and the frontal plane. So all it is just making it seem more complicated when it comes to the hip extension demands with the sumo versus conventional, but it's still the same. What are the differences though? There have to be some sort of differences between the two. Again, if you look at when I'm doing a conventional, when I do go down into a conventional, what you can do, if you see my conventional and you see it from here, if you were to just look at me for a few seconds, and then if I were to go into a sumo and I come down, you're immediately going to notice a few things. Is one, yes, you don't have to bend on as far, but I already explained that. The second thing is you'll notice that my torso is a lot less inclined in a sumo deadlift. And you have to look at the moment arm in regards to the vertebrae of my spine. So when you go into a sumo stance and I'm not leaned forward, or my torso is not as on a heavy of an incline, there's a lot less demands on my back, essentially. So you don't have as much mechanical demands on my back versus a conventional deadlift. So essentially a conventional deadlift is going to be a lot more demanding on your back. You're going to have to resist a lot more to go into spinal flexion during a conventional deadlift than you would a sumo deadlift. So that is one key difference between the two. So essentially, if you're going to use a conventional, it's going to be more on your back, essentially. So if you're someone with a weaker back, that might play into an account you might wanting to pull sumo. No, I'm not saying that that's a permanent fix. You know, I don't think that if you have a weak back, I don't think the best solution is to switch, you know. A conventional might still feel better to you, but you may pull stronger sumo. What that tells me is that if you can pull some more sumo, but a conventional feels better, it probably just means you need to get your back strength up, so that if a conventional feels better, you probably would want the one that feels better to be your strongest one. Because if the sumo feels awkward, but you pull more weight during it, that's probably something that's not going to benefit you in the long run. In the long run, you want to be doing the lifts that you feel strongest in. So again, if you just got to work on your back, if you're going to pull conventional a little bit more, or you have to have a stronger back with conventional. Now, the second difference is the demands on your quads. You got to think is that when you're in a sumo, for you to straighten out your leg, you have to do a few things. Obviously, you're going to have to activate your glutes and your hamstrings to be able to lock out your hips. But the second thing you have to do is your quads are going to have to synergistically help with straightening out your leg. Greg Nuckols had a good example of this, and it's kind of like how when you're doing a bench press, you're not there's no actual direct force or direct challenge to extension of the arm. There isn't. It's not like if you think of a skull crusher where you have a dumbbell in your hand and you have to extend your arm. There's no direct demands on that, but your arm still has to straighten out. And because your hands are locked on the bar, the triceps, even though they don't have any direct resistance to extension of the arm, they still have to synergistically work with your chest and your shoulders to straighten out your arm. So to kind of sum that point up is that you're going to have more demand on your quads during a sumo deadlift. Because again, when you're doing a sumo, to go from this position to this position, you're synergistically pushing force out at an angle to straighten your legs. And that's going to take work with your quads to help do that. Versus a conventional where the quads have a lot less involvement. There's not much involvement of the quads in conventional. Now, there are slight differences in conventional deadlift styles that may make one conventional deadlifter have more quad involvement than another conventional deadlifter, but all in all, there's not a ton of quad involvement in a conventional deadlift. So again, to sum up these points is that the sumo deadlift is not inherently easier than a conventional deadlift. It might be easier for you, it might be harder for you. A sumo deadlift is going to be harder off the floor,
it has a lot more quad demand because the quads have to synergistically work with the hamstrings and the glutes to straighten out the leg and lock out your hips. And then also with sumo deadlift, your torso is a lot less inclined, which means that the moment arm of the vertebrae of your spine is a lot shorter, which means that there's going to be a lot less demand on your back. So it's going to be a lot easier to keep your back straight and neutral or slightly extended in a sumo than it is in a conventional. So a conventional, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of resist that spinal flexion going on during the lift. So you can use that how you will. The best bet is, Greg goes over this too, and I really recommend it. It's a really good tip. Is the best bet is just to give both an honest try for you. I think you should just give both an honest try. Now, if you do one and you immediately feel it's not wrong, it's not right, it just feels really uncomfortable, then obviously you know right off the bat. But if you do both and you're not really sure, what I recommend is maybe do both for a while. See which one feels better, see which one you're stronger at. Because again, just do the one that you're stronger at. And one's not better than the other, one's not going to be inherently easier than the other. I go over the differences between the two lifts. So just use those differences and kind of play them out to you. If you're someone with a weaker back, you might want to go with sumo. Or you could just work on your back and then go conventional. If you just feel sumo feels better and it doesn't feel like it hurts your back in a bad way, then just go sumo. If you feel like conventional lets you drive more force on the ground, you feel like it's just easier and comfortable for you, use that one. If you guys have any questions, comments, please post them down below. I'll see you guys in the next video.